Everybody does things for a reason, but often the main question is why? What was the reason? Did they do it for themselves? For the future? Obligation? To make a difference? Or for others? There are many possible answers to this question, which is why we are asking it. What influenced Japan to attack US territory during World War II? We have done research and found information to help us answer this question. I, Damien, will be sharing our background information with you. Alan will be responsible for covering the ultimate cause of Japan's attack. Aaron will cover the US response to Japan's attack. Sebastian will provide the lasting impacts Japan's attack created. And Alan will share our conclusion. Background. During the late 1930s, tensions between China and Japan were rising until both nations clashed and went into an all-out war, beginning with Japan's invasion of China in 1937. The United States initially stayed neutral, but as Japanese aggression intensified, especially through its brutal military action in China, U.S. policymakers grew increasingly concerned. The uneasy truce between the U.S. and Japan began to break down in 1940, when President Roosevelt authorized aid to China, which Japan saw as a hostile move. That same year, Japan signed the Tripartite Pact with Germany and Italy, further straining relations as it increased U.S. fear of Japanese aggression. In response, the U.S. imposed economic sanctions, including restrictions on scrap metal, aviation fuel, and eventually oil. These actions severely impacted Japan's access to vital resources and were viewed as Japanese leaders as a direct threat, sharply escalating tensions between the two countries and paving the way toward war.
During the early 1940s, Japan had partnered with the Axis powers and was already deep into the Second Sino-Japanese War, where it sought to expand its control in Asia. The United States opposed Japan's aggression by providing aid to China and responding with strict economic sanctions, including cutting off critical exports like oil, steel, and other war materials. These embargoes threatened Japan's ability to continue its military campaigns, as its economy and war machine greatly relied on imported resources. With diplomatic negotiations failing and facing a tightening blockade on its access to essential supplies, Japan saw war with the US as inevitable. This pressure ultimately led Japan to strike preemptively against American military forces in the Pacific, launching a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941.
Following the attack, the citizens of the United States have never been more united in a decision before or after than declaring war on Japan on December 7, 1941. It was an unanimous decision backed by not only the government, but every righteous and patriotic American. Despite this being a devastating attack, the U.S. chose to focus more on Germany for a couple years shortly before making its counterattack on Japan in order to gain the support of the British Army. While the U.S. entered the war, there were also new developments being made in relation to atomic weapons under the government project known as the Manhattan Project. The Manhattan Project led to the U.S. inventing two variations of the atomic bomb known as the Little Boy and the Fat Man. The U.S. would then make use of these new developments against Japan, using it to decimate Hiroshima and Nagasaki on August 6th and August 9th of 1941, killing hundreds of thousands of Japanese citizens. Following this attack, the Japanese surrendered to the United States, marking the end of the Pacific conflict of World War II, as well as being the end of the war itself.
Lasting impacts. These attacks led to the deaths of many, roughly estimated around 150,000 to 246,000 deaths due to the bomb's explosion, with many more dying from the radiation left behind after the attack. In addition to this, the bombings impacted future international policies by becoming the foundation of the Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which served to illegalize the use and threat of nuclear weapons on national territory. Following the end of the war, the US was suddenly elevated to a national superpower, as most of Europe was still reeling and recovering from the losses in the war. And with this new status and power, the US decided to take occupation of Japan to maintain peace in an attempt to discourage another conflict in the future. However, this wouldn't be the end of the US conflict with Europe, as the development of nuclear weapons will later be the root of the Cold War and the arms race with the Soviet Union.
In essence, the Japanese attack on US territory during World War II was influenced by a combination of escalating tensions, resource dependency, and strategic necessity. Japan's aggressive expansion in Asia, particularly its invasion of China in 1937, drew increasing concern from the United States, which initially remained neutral but later began supporting China with aid. This support, coupled with Japan's alliance with Germany and Italy, strained US-Japan relations further. The situation worsened when the United States imposed economic sanctions, including restrictions on vital resources like oil, steel, and aviation fuel, materials critical to Japan's war efforts. These embargoes crippled Japan's ability to sustain its military campaign, creating a dire need for access to resources. Diplomatic negotiations between the two nations failed, leaving Japan feeling cornered and viewing war with the US as inevitable. To preemptively weaken American military power in the Pacific and secure its own strategic advantage, Japan launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. Thus, the attack was driven by Japan's desperation to overcome resource shortages, its ambition to expand its influence in Asia, and its perception that conflict with the United States could no longer be avoided.